The morning my wife laughed in my face and told the flight crew not to let me anywhere near the private jet was the same morning she and her family were standing on a runway owned by one of my companies preparing to board an aircraft registered under another one of my companies, and the cruelest part of it all was that every person mocking me believed I was the only poor man on the tarmac when in reality I was the secret owner of more than $50 billion in assets and 3 private jets, including the one gleaming behind them in the sunrise. The jet looked perfect in the golden light. White body polished so clean it reflected the first streaks of dawn across the runway. Chrome details catching the morning sun. Stairs lowered. Door open. Cabin crew standing ready. Like this was just another quiet departure for elite passengers whose names would never be spoken outside secured terminals. The word Orem gleamed softly on the forward fuselage, and none of the people standing there knew I had personally approved that branding when I acquired the aviation company 2 years earlier through a holding group designed to keep my name invisible. I stood a few steps away from the stairs wearing a simple sea green shirt and dark trousers while my wife and her family clustered near the foot of the jet like a group of people who believed they had finally reached the life they had always talked about in living rooms and church parking lots and family dinners where status meant everything. Angela stood closest to the stairs with the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes when it is rooted in superiority rather than joy. Her father stood behind her with one hand resting on his belt and the other pointing toward me as if he had just told one of his favorite jokes. Her mother shook her head while laughing softly. Her younger brother grinned openly. And even the stewardess at the aircraft door looked uncertain because she could feel there was something wrong in the atmosphere even if she did not yet understand what. Angela looked at me and let the smile on her face stretch just a little wider. "You can stop standing there now." I simply looked at the aircraft they believed belonged to the luxury broker Marcus had bragged about all week, and then I looked back at the people who thought they were leaving me behind. Angela stepped a little closer to me and lowered her voice just enough to feel personal without losing the performance of it. "You embarrassed yourself enough already," she said. "Go home, David. You are not boarding this jet." I held her gaze calmly. "And why exactly am I not boarding it?" That made her laugh in disbelief. "Because you were not invited," she said. "Because this is not your world. Because people like you do not belong on flights like this." Her father clapped once as if she had delivered a line worth celebrating. "That is exactly right," he said. "You should have accepted a long time ago that my daughter outgrew you." Her mother nodded with that same cruel calm people use when they think they are being reasonable while they are actually humiliating somebody. "Angela has taste," she said. "She has standards. And she is finally living accordingly." Her brother stepped forward, too eager to miss a chance to make me look smaller. "This jet alone is worth more than you will ever make in 3 lifetimes," he said. Then he laughed again, looking around at the others for approval, and they gave it to him immediately. The flight attendant near the door shifted slightly but remained silent because professional people are trained not to interfere in family drama unless instructed. Angela folded her arms and studied me with a look I had seen too often in the last year. Not anger. Not sorrow. Just disappointment shaped by assumption. "You really thought you were going to come with us?" she asked. I said nothing. That seemed to irritate her more than pleading would have. Because arrogance feeds on reaction and I was giving her none. Her father pointed toward the terminal behind us. "Why are you still here?" he said. "Call a taxi or take the bus or whatever it is men like you use and leave us to our trip." Her brother laughed again. "Maybe ask the pilot if he needs the floors cleaned before departure." Angela smiled at that one and looked back at me. "You see," she said. "This is what I mean. You never understood levels. You were content with ordinary life while I was meant for more." Her voice grew louder now, not because she needed to but because she wanted everyone there, including the ground crew in the distance, to hear the narrative clearly. "I spent years waiting for you to become something," she said. "Years. And all you ever gave me was patient speeches and plans that never looked like progress." Her mother sighed dramatically. "That is the problem with quiet men," she said. "Sometimes quiet is not discipline. Sometimes it is just failure dressed up to look humble." That got more laughter. I let it pass over me like wind. Because I had heard their assumptions before. At dinners. At birthdays. At their house. At mine. In the soft language of concern and the harder language of disrespect. They believed I earned modestly because I lived modestly. They believed I lacked ambition because I did not advertise strategy. They believed I was being carried by Angela because I never once corrected them when they said she was the reason our life had class. They saw a man who drove a simple car when he was not being picked up by company vehicles registered under different names. They saw a husband who wore the same watch for years instead of rotating luxury pieces for attention. They saw someone who slipped away to private calls without saying much and returned without stories of conquest or ego or visible triumph. They did not see the holding structures. The offshore subsidiaries. The aviation group. The tech acquisitions. The energy corridors. The real estate portfolio spanning 6 cities and 3 countries. They did not see the fact that the runway under our feet was controlled by a company whose majority owner answered only to me. They did not see the fact that the jet behind them was one of 3 private aircraft I owned through Orem Aviation. They did not see anything because they never looked beyond what could be bragged about at a family gathering. Angela noticed I was still calm and it unsettled her just enough to sharpen her tone. "Say something," she demanded. "Are you deaf or just determined to humiliate yourself completely before we leave?" I looked at her calmly and then passed her toward the open jet door where the stewardess still stood waiting for final boarding confirmation. Then I looked back at Angela. "You seem very certain this jet is yours to board," I said. Her brother barked a laugh. "Hear that? Man trying to sound mysterious now." Her father smirked. "Not mysterious. Delusional." Angela took one more step toward me and dropped her voice again. "Marcus arranged this trip," she said. "Marcus knows people who own jets. Marcus moves in circles you could never enter. So stop standing in the way of something you were never meant to be part of." That name settled in the air. Marcus. Her lover. The same Marcus who had spent the last 6 months parading around with my wife as if he were the answer to every complaint she ever had about my silence. Marcus who drove rented confidence like it was inherited blood. Marcus who mistook access for ownership and volume for power. Marcus who had not yet arrived on the tarmac because he was finishing a call near the terminal but whose absence was strangely louder than if he had been standing there. I let the name pass without reaction. Her father noticed and took it as weakness. "That is right," he said. "Marcus made this happen. Marcus is the man she should have married in the first place." That line earned the biggest laugh yet. Even Angela did not stop it. She just stood there letting it land. Letting me hear it. Letting the humiliation complete itself. A black airport vehicle rolled slowly along the edge of the tarmac in the distance and I noticed it immediately because I recognized who would be inside before it got close enough for the others to care. Angela was still speaking. "You could have left with dignity," she said. "But you always do this. You linger where you are not wanted. You stay too long hoping pity will turn into opportunity." Her mother nodded. "That is exactly him. Always waiting for life to hand him something he did not build." I almost smiled at the irony of that sentence. The vehicle drew nearer now. Dark polished body. Small flag marker on the hood. Discreet airport insignia on the side. The kind of car used only for ownership-level movements inside private terminals. The stewardess at the jet door saw it too and straightened slightly. So did one of the ground personnel farther down the runway. But Angela and her family remained fixed on me because people who believe they are finally superior become blind to everything else. Her brother stepped closer until he was only a few feet away. "Let me help you understand this clearly," he said. "When this jet takes off you are staying here. You are not coming with us. You are not one of us. And whatever fantasy you built in your head ends this morning." The vehicle came to a stop a short distance behind them. A suited man stepped out. Then another. Then the chief flight operations director himself emerged from the rear seat carrying a leather folio and scanning the tarmac until his eyes landed on me. The change in his expression was immediate. Not confusion. Recognition. Respect. Angela saw movement behind her and glanced back with mild irritation before returning her attention to me. "You really should leave before security embarrasses you further," she said. I looked at her calmly. "Security will not be embarrassing me this morning." That line drew another laugh from her father, but it died halfway out of his mouth because by then the chief operations director was already striding toward us with the two suited men behind him. The stewardess at the door stood straighter now. The ground crew nearby suddenly became more alert. Angela noticed the shift this time. So did her mother. Her brother turned first and frowned. The operations director stopped directly in front of me and lowered his head respectfully. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," he said. "Apologies for the delay. Final clearances for your aircraft are complete and the other two jets are also ready pending your instruction." Silence hit the runway like a physical force. Angela blinked once. Her father's mouth remained slightly open. Her mother looked from him to me and back again. Her brother actually laughed from shock before realizing nobody else was laughing with him. The operations director continued calmly as if nothing unusual had happened. "Your Monaco call has been moved 30 minutes later to accommodate the board in New York and the manifest for this aircraft remains under your sole authorization." He opened the folio. "I only need your confirmation on the passenger list." Angela's fingers slowly loosened at her sides. Her brother took a half step back. The stewardess at the jet door now looked not uncertain but horrified because she understood immediately what kind of mistake had almost unfolded in front of her. And I stood there on the runway still in my sea green shirt, still calm, still exactly the man they had mocked only seconds earlier. Except now the story had finally turned far enough for them to see the truth. The jet they were laughing about. The runway beneath them. The flight crew. The luxury trip. The circles they believed they were entering through Marcus. All of it belonged to me. And the look on Angela's face in that moment, that first raw instant of realization, was only the beginning. The silence that fell across the runway after the operations director greeted me felt heavier than all the laughter that had filled the air only seconds earlier, and for the first time that morning every person standing near the jet suddenly looked uncertain about where they belonged. Angela's father was the first to speak, though the confidence in his voice had completely evaporated and what remained sounded more like confusion than authority. "What did he just call you?" he asked slowly. Angela did not answer because her eyes were locked on the operations director, who still stood in front of me holding the leather folio with the calm posture of a man used to dealing with powerful people every day. Her brother looked from him to me and then toward the jet behind us as if hoping the aircraft itself would suddenly explain the situation. "Mr. Carter," the operations director said again politely. "The flight crew is ready whenever you are and the ground control clearance window remains open for the next 12 minutes. He gestured toward the aircraft behind Angela and her family. "Your jet is fully fueled and prepared for departure." Angela whispered quietly. "Your jet." Her mother shook her head slowly as if trying to push the sentence out of reality. "No," she murmured. "That cannot be right." Her father straightened his posture and looked at the operations director with forced authority. "Young man," he said, "there must be some mistake. This jet belongs to Marcus's people." The operations director blinked once, clearly confused. "Marcus?" he asked. Angela's brother stepped forward quickly, trying to recover the situation. "Yes. Marcus Hale. He arranged this flight." The operations director frowned slightly while glancing at the manifest. "Mr. Hale is listed as a guest passenger," he said calmly. Angela's brother froze. Guest passenger. The words hung in the air. Angela finally spoke again, though her voice sounded fragile compared to the sharp tone she used only moments earlier. "What do you mean guest passenger?" The operations director answered with professional patience. This aircraft is registered under Orem Aviation, which operates exclusively under Carter Holdings. He looked at me again respectfully. Mr. Carter is the sole owner of the company. Angela's father looked like someone had just removed the ground beneath his feet. Sole owner. He repeated quietly. Angela's mother covered her mouth slightly. Angela herself had not moved. Her eyes remained fixed on me. The same man she had just called poor. The same man she had just denied entry to the jet. The same man she had mocked in front of her entire family. Her brother finally laughed nervously. "Okay," he said. "Okay, hold on." He pointed at me. "You are telling me this guy owns that jet?" The operations director answered calmly. "Mr. Carter owns 3 jets under the Orem fleet. The one behind you is the Gulfstream registered under tail number AC-91. Her brother slowly turned around to look at the aircraft again. The polished white body. The chrome engines. The open door. The stewardess who now stood completely still watching the scene unfold. Angela's father looked at me again. "You," he said slowly. "You own this jet?" I answered calmly. "Yes." The word landed harder than anything else spoken that morning. Angela took a slow step back. Her mother looked between us both. Angela whispered again. "David." Her voice was no longer sharp. It carried disbelief. "You," she said, "own this?" I nodded slightly. Her brother shook his head repeatedly. "This is crazy," he muttered. Her father suddenly became defensive. "This does not make sense," he said. "If you own jets, why do you live the way you do? Why do you drive that old car? Why do you dress like that? Why do you let people think you are broke?" I answered calmly. "Because people reveal their true character when they believe you have nothing." No one laughed this time. Angela lowered her eyes briefly. Her mother looked ashamed. Her brother said nothing. Angela's father, however, still looked stunned. "But Marcus arranged this flight," he said. The operations director nodded. "Mr. Hale requested permission to use the aircraft yesterday evening," he said. "Mr. Carter had already scheduled this jet for today." Angela slowly turned toward the jet again. Then back toward me. "So," she whispered, "Marcus asked you for permission." I looked at her. "He asked my company." Her brother rubbed his forehead in disbelief. "Marcus never said that," he murmured. Angela spoke quietly. "Marcus told us the jet belonged to his clients." The operations director gave a small polite smile. "Technically correct," he said. "Mr. Carter's companies are clients of Orem Aviation." Angela's father exhaled slowly as if the truth was becoming too heavy to carry. "And you?" he said, looking at me again. "You just let us stand here mocking you?" I answered simply. "Yes." Angela finally stepped closer to me again. Her voice softer than it had been all morning. "Why?" she asked. I looked at her calmly. "Because I wanted to see whether your respect depended on money." Angela looked like she had been struck by something invisible. Her mother whispered quietly. "Angela." Angela did not respond. Her brother suddenly turned toward the terminal building. "Where is Marcus?" he muttered. Almost on cue, the familiar black sedan rolled out from the private terminal road and stopped near the runway entrance. Marcus stepped out wearing a designer jacket and sunglasses with the confident walk of a man who believed he was about to impress everyone present. He had not yet seen the expressions on their faces. He had not yet noticed the operations director standing beside me. He had not yet realized the entire story he had built for weeks was about to collapse in front of the people he was trying to impress. Marcus walked toward us smiling broadly. "Hope you all ready for the best weekend of your lives," he called out. Angela looked at him silently. Her father looked exhausted. Her brother shook his head slowly. Marcus finally reached us and noticed the silence. "What is going on?" he asked. Then his eyes moved toward the operations director. Then toward me. Then toward Angela. The operations director spoke calmly. "Mr. Hale, good morning." Marcus forced a confident smile. "Morning," he said. "We are ready to board." The operations director nodded. "Yes," he said. "Mr. Carter's aircraft is prepared for departure." Marcus blinked once. "Mr. Carter," he repeated. Then he slowly turned toward me. And the smile disappeared from his face. Angela watched him carefully. Because the moment he realized who truly owned the jet was the moment everything he had built his arrogance on finally shattered. Marcus looked at me. Then at the aircraft. Then back at me again. And for the first time since he entered Angela's life, Marcus Hale had absolutely nothing clever to say. The look on Marcus's face when the operations director repeated my name was the kind of expression people get when a story they built inside their head suddenly collides with reality so hard that the mind refuses to accept what the eyes are clearly seeing. Marcus stood frozen for several seconds staring at me while the sound of distant engines from another runway drifted across the airport and the early morning sun continued climbing slowly over the horizon. Angela watched him carefully. Her father watched me. Her mother looked down at the ground. Her brother kept glancing between the jet and Marcus as if waiting for him to laugh and reveal that the entire situation was some strange misunderstanding. But Marcus did not laugh. Instead he slowly lowered his sunglasses and looked directly at me. "David," he said cautiously. The operations director stepped slightly aside, allowing the view of the jet behind Angela's family to remain completely clear, as if he understood that this moment belonged to truth and not to interruption. Marcus forced a small laugh. "This is some kind of joke, right?" he said. Angela did not respond. Her brother answered instead, though his voice sounded far less confident than before. "Apparently not." Marcus turned toward him. "What do you mean apparently not?" Her brother pointed toward the operations director. "He says David owns the jet." Marcus shook his head. "That is impossible." He looked back at the operations director. "You must have mixed up the name." The operations director answered calmly. "There is no mistake. Marcus Hale. This aircraft and 2 others are registered under Orem Aviation, which operates entirely under Carter Holdings." Marcus's eyes moved slowly back toward me again. "Carter," he repeated. Angela whispered quietly. "David Carter." Marcus looked confused. He stared at me longer now. Then suddenly a different kind of recognition began forming behind his eyes. The kind of recognition that appears when a person realizes they overlooked something obvious because their pride convinced them it could not possibly matter. Marcus spoke again slowly. "Carter Holdings," he murmured. Angela looked at him. Marcus continued. "Carter Holdings owns Aurora Logistics." Angela nodded slightly. Marcus continued, thinking out loud. "Aurora Logistics merged with Blackstone Transit 2 years ago." Angela's brother frowned. "What does that have to do with anything?" Marcus answered quietly. "Blackstone Transit bought the aviation group." His eyes widened slightly as the realization reached its full shape. Marcus looked directly at me again. "You," he said. "You are that Carter." I said nothing. Angela watched his face carefully. Marcus suddenly laughed once, but the sound carried no confidence this time. "This cannot be real," he muttered. Angela finally spoke. "Marcus." Marcus looked at her. "The operations director said David owns the company." Marcus turned toward the aircraft again. Then back at me. Then toward the runway. Then back to Angela. His confidence cracked visibly. Marcus asked quietly. You never told me your last name. Angela said softly. You never asked. Marcus's jaw tightened. He looked back at me again. You are telling me, he said slowly, that you own Carter Holdings. I answered calmly. Yes. Marcus's shoulders dropped slightly. Angela's father looked between us both. Marcus, he said. You said this jet belonged to your clients. Marcus did not answer immediately. Angela's brother spoke again. Marcus. Marcus finally replied quietly. Technically it does. Angela frowned. Explain. Marcus exhaled slowly. Carter Holdings, he said, is one of the biggest investment groups in aviation logistics. Angela stared at him. Marcus continued. Which means. He looked at me again. David owns Orem Aviation. Angela whispered quietly. Which means he owns this jet. Marcus nodded slowly. Angela's mother covered her mouth again. Her father rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. Angela looked at me with an expression that was slowly transforming from disbelief into something heavier. Something closer to realization. Something that began connecting memories. Arguments. Late nights. Phone calls. The strange calm I always carried when others bragged about success. Angela spoke softly. The trips you took. She said. The meetings you never explained. The company calls late at night. Her eyes widened slightly. You were not working for someone. I shook my head. No. Marcus stared at the ground now. Angela looked back toward the jet. Then at the operations director. Then at me again. And the weight of everything she had said to me only minutes earlier returned to her mind like a storm rolling backwards. You are poor. You do not belong here. People like you do not board jets like this. Angela swallowed slowly. Her brother whispered. Angela. Angela did not respond. Marcus suddenly straightened slightly as if trying to salvage something from the situation. Look. He said. This is clearly a misunderstanding. Angela turned toward him slowly. Marcus continued quickly. I did not know he owned the company. Angela raised an eyebrow. You were mocking him 5 minutes ago. Marcus hesitated. Angela's voice sharpened. You said he would never enter circles like yours. Marcus looked embarrassed. Angela added quietly. Apparently his circles own yours. Marcus said nothing. Angela turned back toward me again. David. She said softly. Why did you never tell me? I answered calmly. Because I wanted someone to love the man, not the empire. Angela lowered her eyes. Her father spoke quietly, now the arrogance gone from his voice. David. He said. You should have told us. I looked at him calmly. Would it have changed how you treated me? The silence answered that question before anyone could speak. Angela's brother rubbed the back of his neck. Angela's mother looked away. Her father remained quiet. Marcus suddenly stepped closer again. Look. He said. None of this needs to be awkward. Angela turned sharply toward him. Marcus. Marcus continued. David. He said, looking at me. Clearly we got off on the wrong foot earlier. Angela stared at him. Marcus forced a polite smile. If I had known who you were. Angela interrupted him immediately. Exactly. Marcus blinked. Angela's voice carried quiet anger now. If you had known who he was. You would have treated him differently. Marcus hesitated. Angela continued. Which means you never respected him. Marcus said nothing. Angela looked back toward me. David. She said. I. Her voice faltered slightly. The words she wanted to say were now much harder than the insults she had spoken earlier. Because apology is always heavier than arrogance. And the jet behind us, the one she denied me entry to, was still waiting for its owner to decide who would board it. And who would stay behind. The quiet that followed Angela's unfinished sentence stretched across the runway like a long shadow while the rising sun painted the side of the jet in warm gold, and every person standing there understood that the moment had shifted into something none of them had prepared for. Angela stood in front of me with her hands slightly apart as if she had started to reach out and then changed her mind halfway through the movement, while her family remained behind her, no longer laughing, no longer pointing, no longer certain about anything they had believed earlier that morning. Marcus, however, was still fighting to regain control of the situation, because arrogance rarely disappears quickly and men like him survive by turning uncomfortable truths into new performances. "David," he said again, trying to sound friendly. Clearly we started off on the wrong foot. Angela turned her head slowly toward him. Marcus continued speaking as if the rest of us were not even part of the conversation. "You should have said something earlier," he said. "You let everyone believe something that was not true." I watched him calmly. Marcus kept going. "If you had told us you owned the company, none of this would have happened." Angela's father nodded slightly as if that explanation gave him something safe to hold on to. "Yes," he added. "All this confusion could have been avoided." I answered calmly. "Nothing was confusing." Angela's brother frowned. "What do you mean?" I looked at him. "You believed what you wanted to believe." Angela lowered her eyes again. Marcus crossed his arms slightly. "That is unfair," he said. "People judge based on what they see." I nodded once. "Exactly." Marcus frowned. Angela spoke quietly. "Marcus." Marcus looked at her. Angela continued. "What we saw was a man we thought had nothing." Marcus nodded quickly. "Exactly." Angela finished the sentence slowly. "And we treated him like he had nothing." Marcus said nothing. Angela's father sighed heavily. "David," he said. "Look, son. If things were said earlier that sounded disrespectful." I looked at him calmly. They were disrespectful. The honesty in my voice made him stop speaking. Angela's mother stepped forward slightly. "We did not know," she said softly. I answered. "That did not stop you from laughing." Angela's brother looked uncomfortable now. Marcus shifted his weight. Angela whispered. "David." I raised my hand, gently stopping her. Because the apology she was about to begin deserved to wait. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because truth deserves to arrive fully before forgiveness appears. Marcus, however, had different priorities. "Look," he said again. "We should not make this dramatic." He gestured toward the jet. "We are all here to travel." Angela looked at him. Marcus continued. "David obviously has the authority here." He forced a polite smile toward me. "So why do we not all just board the jet and move forward?" Angela stared at him in disbelief. "Marcus," she said slowly. "You spent the entire morning mocking him." Marcus shrugged slightly. "People make mistakes." Angela shook her head. "You called him a failure." Marcus tried to laugh it off. "We did not know." Angela's voice grew sharper. "You told him he did not belong on the aircraft." Marcus opened his mouth but said nothing. Angela looked back at me again. "David," she said. Her voice softened. "I need to say something." The operations director stood quietly beside us, watching the scene with the calm patience of someone used to powerful people having complicated mornings. Angela took a slow breath. "David," she said again. "When I stood here earlier telling you to leave, I believed you had nothing." She looked down briefly. "I believed I had wasted years waiting for you to become something more." Her voice grew quieter. I thought Marcus represented the life I deserved. Marcus shifted slightly at the mention of his name. Angela continued. And because of that belief I humiliated you in front of everyone. The runway remained silent. Angela lifted her head again. I was wrong, she said. The honesty in her voice carried more weight than any of the insults she had spoken earlier. Her father looked at the ground. Her mother wiped her hands nervously against her dress. Her brother said nothing. Marcus, however, spoke again quickly. Angela, you are overreacting. Angela turned toward him slowly. Marcus continued. David obviously succeeded in business. Angela stared at him. Marcus kept talking. But that does not erase the problems in their marriage. Angela's eyes narrowed. Marcus gestured toward me. Money does not change who someone is. Angela replied calmly. No. It reveals who everyone else is. Marcus froze. Angela turned back toward me again. David, she said. I cannot undo what I said earlier. She paused briefly. But I want you to know I understand now. I waited. Angela continued. You spent years building something extraordinary. While we stood here mocking you for being quiet. The breeze moved softly across the runway again. Angela finished quietly. I am sorry. Her family looked relieved that the words had finally been spoken. Marcus, however, still seemed uneasy. Because apology changes the power of a situation. And power shifting was the one thing Marcus had never been good at handling. The operations director cleared his throat gently. Mr. Carter, he said. The departure window will close in 7 minutes. I nodded slightly. Angela looked toward the jet. Then back toward me. Her voice was calm but uncertain. David. Are we still flying? Marcus's head lifted quickly. Her father looked hopeful. Her brother leaned forward slightly. The answer to that question suddenly mattered to everyone on the runway. Because 5 minutes earlier they believed the jet belonged to them. Now they were waiting to learn whether the man they mocked would still allow them to board it. I looked at the aircraft. The polished engines. The open door. The crew waiting patiently. Then I looked back at Angela and her family. And finally at Marcus. Who had spent months convincing my wife that he belonged in worlds I would never enter. The runway remained silent. And every person there was waiting to see what the billionaire they had just humiliated would do next. The silence on the runway stretched so long that even the wind moving across the open tarmac seemed to slow down, as if the morning itself had paused to watch what I would decide next. Angela stood in front of me, no longer smiling, no longer proud, no longer certain, while the rest of her family waited behind her like passengers who had suddenly realized they might not actually have a seat on the flight they had been bragging about all week. Marcus, however, was still trying to stand tall, though the small tension in his shoulders revealed how uncomfortable he had become since the truth surfaced. The operations director checked his watch quietly but said nothing, because men in his position understand that powerful decisions cannot be rushed even when airplanes are waiting. Angela finally spoke again. David. Her voice carried a softness that had not existed earlier that morning. Are we still flying? I looked toward the jet again. The white body glowing under the sunlight. The stairs still lowered. The stewardess standing at the door patiently. Then I looked back at Angela. Why do you want to board now? I asked calmly. The question surprised her. Angela blinked once. What do you mean? Her brother answered before she could. Because we were invited. He said. Her father nodded. Marcus arranged the trip. Marcus straightened slightly, as if hearing his name restored some of the authority he had lost. Exactly. He said. The flight was planned weeks ago. I looked at him calmly. Planned with whose jet? Marcus hesitated. Angela's brother looked toward the aircraft again. Marcus cleared his throat. Your jet. he said reluctantly. Angela's father spoke again. David, he said. Look. Things got heated earlier. But that does not mean we should ruin the entire trip. Her mother nodded quickly. Yes. We all made mistakes. Angela, however, remained quiet. Her eyes stayed on me. Marcus tried again. David, he said. You are clearly a successful man. No need to let pride ruin a simple misunderstanding. Angela slowly turned her head toward him. Marcus, she said quietly. Marcus paused. Angela continued. You spent the entire morning humiliating him. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Angela added. And now you want him to forget everything because you still want the trip. Marcus looked irritated. Angela, he said. Let us be realistic. She looked at him calmly. I am being realistic. Marcus sighed. David owns the jet. Angela nodded once. Marcus continued. Which means if he decides nobody flies today, then nobody flies. Angela turned back toward me again. David, she said softly. What do you want? I looked at her. The question felt simple, but it carried years behind it. Years of quiet dinners. Years of family gatherings where I had been treated like background noise. Years of Marcus whispering promises about bigger lives and louder futures. I answered slowly. What I want. I paused briefly. Is honesty. Angela nodded slightly. Her father looked confused. Her brother frowned. Marcus crossed his arms again. Angela asked quietly. What do you mean? I looked at her family first. Then at Marcus. Then back at her. I want to know something. I said. Angela waited. If this jet was not mine, would any of you still want me here? The runway became silent again. Angela's brother looked away. Her mother said nothing. Her father sighed. Marcus spoke quickly. That is not a fair question. I looked at him. Why not? Marcus shrugged. Because circumstances changed. Angela interrupted quietly. No. She said. It is fair. Marcus looked at her. Angela continued. Because if the jet was not his. She looked back toward me. You would still be standing here alone. No one answered. Angela finished softly. And we would still be laughing. Her father rubbed his face. Her brother looked embarrassed. Her mother whispered. Angela. Angela raised a hand, stopping her. Let him answer. She said. Then she turned back to me. David. You asked what we would do if the jet was not yours. She took a breath. The truth is. Her voice faltered slightly. We would still be humiliating you. Marcus looked uncomfortable. Angela continued. And that truth matters. She looked directly into my eyes now. Because it shows what kind of people we were this morning. The breeze moved across the runway again. The operations director remained perfectly still. The stewardess watched quietly from the door of the jet. Angela finished slowly. We were cruel. Her father nodded slightly. Her mother wiped her eyes. Her brother looked ashamed. Marcus said nothing. Angela continued. David. She said. You built something extraordinary. You stayed humble. You stayed patient. And we treated you like you were nothing. I waited. Angela added quietly. I cannot erase that. Marcus suddenly stepped forward again. All right. He said. Enough of the emotional speeches. Angela looked at him sharply. Marcus continued. David. Let us handle this like adults. Angela frowned. Marcus gestured toward the jet. The flight is ready. Everyone made mistakes. But you are not the type of man who would cancel a trip just to prove a point. He smiled slightly as if he believed he had finally regained control of the conversation. You are better than that. Angela stared at him. Marcus continued confidently. So let us board. Enjoy the weekend. And move on. The operations director glanced toward me, quietly waiting for the instruction that would determine whether the engines would start. Angela said nothing. Her family waited nervously. Marcus looked confident again. But confidence built on assumptions is fragile. I looked at the aircraft once more. Then at the runway. Then at the group standing in front of me. And finally I looked directly at Marcus. You are right about one thing, I said calmly. Marcus smiled slightly. I am not the kind of man who cancels a flight just to prove a point. Angela watched carefully. Marcus nodded. Exactly. I continued. But I am the kind of man who decides who deserves to be on it. Marcus's smile slowly faded. Angela's brother shifted nervously. Her father swallowed. The operations director straightened slightly, ready to follow whatever instruction came next. Because the jet behind us, the one everyone believed they were boarding, was still waiting for one final decision. And that decision belonged entirely to the man they had laughed at only minutes earlier. The moment I finished speaking, the tension on the runway became almost visible, like heat rising off the pavement, while every person standing there waited for the next words that would decide whether the stairs of the jet behind them would lead to luxury or to humiliation. Marcus stood very still now, because the confident smile he had just worn had disappeared the moment he realized the decision was not about whether the flight would happen but about who would actually be allowed on board. Angela watched me closely. Her father looked uncertain. Her brother shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Her mother clasped her hands together nervously. The operations director remained beside me, calm and silent, ready to carry out whatever instruction I gave. Marcus cleared his throat and tried again. David, he said carefully. You are clearly a reasonable man. Angela's eyes narrowed slightly. Marcus continued. There is no need to turn this into something dramatic. I looked at him calmly. You already turned it into something dramatic. Marcus hesitated. Angela's brother whispered under his breath. That is true. Marcus ignored him. David, he said. This trip was meant to celebrate something. Angela turned toward him. Celebrate what? Marcus paused for a second. Angela's voice sharpened. You said it was to celebrate the investment deal you closed. Marcus looked uncomfortable. Angela continued. The deal you said would change our lives. Marcus forced a smile. It still will. Angela stared at him. Marcus spoke quickly. The point is, this weekend was planned for all of us. Angela looked back at me. David, she said quietly. What are you going to do? The question floated through the morning air. I looked at the aircraft again. Then at the family standing in front of me. Then finally at Marcus. Marcus held my gaze, trying to appear confident. But the small tension in his jaw revealed the truth. He was waiting. The same way I had stood there earlier, waiting while they laughed. I spoke calmly. Marcus. He blinked. You arranged this trip. Marcus nodded slowly. Yes. I gestured toward the jet. You promised everyone a luxury flight. Marcus nodded again. Yes. I asked another question. Did you tell them who actually owned the jet? Marcus looked embarrassed. No. Angela crossed her arms slightly. Marcus continued defensively. Because I did not know. Angela answered immediately. You never asked. Marcus fell silent. I nodded once. That seems to be a pattern today. Angela's father sighed quietly. David, he said. Look. I understand you are upset. But we are family. I looked at him calmly. You did not treat me like family earlier. He looked down. Angela's mother spoke softly. We were wrong. Angela's brother nodded. Yes. Marcus suddenly interrupted. Fine. He said. Everyone was wrong. Angela looked irritated. Marcus continued. But the jet is ready. The crew is waiting. And the weekend plans are already paid for. Angela looked at him again. Paid for by who? Marcus hesitated. Angela's brother whispered. Probably David. Marcus looked annoyed. Angela ignored him. David. She said. You asked a fair question earlier. I listened. Angela continued. If the jet was not yours, we would still be humiliating you. She took a breath. And I cannot pretend that is not true. Her honesty hung in the air. Angela finished quietly. But I also know something else. I waited. Angela continued. You could have revealed the truth earlier. You could have stopped us from embarrassing ourselves. I nodded. Yes. Angela asked. Why did you not? I answered calmly. Because people reveal themselves more clearly when they think they are winning. Marcus muttered. That is manipulative. Angela turned toward him. Marcus. Marcus shrugged. What? Angela replied calmly. You tried to manipulate my entire marriage. Marcus said nothing. Angela looked back toward me. David. She said softly. What happens now? The runway remained silent. The operations director glanced toward the jet. The stewardess waited at the door. Angela's family watched me nervously. Marcus tried to stand tall again. But this time he did not speak. Because even he understood the next words would determine everything. I spoke slowly. The flight is still happening. Angela's brother exhaled in relief. Her father nodded. Her mother smiled slightly. Marcus relaxed a little. Angela, however, remained still. Because she knew the sentence was not finished. I continued calmly. But the passenger list is changing. Marcus stiffened. Angela's father looked worried. Her brother frowned. Marcus spoke quickly. David, there is no need for that. I raised a hand stopping him. You said earlier that people like me do not belong on jets like this. Marcus's jaw tightened. Angela's brother looked away. Her father said nothing. I looked at Marcus. Now we are going to find out which people actually do. Marcus opened his mouth but stopped. Angela watched me carefully. Because she understood something Marcus did not yet realize. This was not about revenge. This was about truth. And truth always rearranges the room. I turned toward the operations director. Prepare the jet for departure. Yes, sir. He said immediately. Then I added one more sentence. But update the passenger list. The operations director waited. Angela's family looked tense again. Marcus stared at me. The runway fell silent. And the next names I spoke would determine who boarded the billion-dollar jet. And who stayed behind watching it disappear into the sky. The runway became completely silent after I told the operations director to update the passenger list, and even the faint sound of the jet's auxiliary engine humming quietly beneath the polished fuselage seemed louder now, because every person standing there understood the next few words would decide who would experience the luxury trip they had been bragging about and who would remain standing on the concrete watching it leave without them. The operations director stood ready with the manifest tablet in his hand waiting for the names, while the stewardess at the door watched with careful attention because she had already sensed the power shift that had taken place on the runway. Angela stood directly in front of me now, no longer laughing, no longer confident, but calm in a way that showed she understood the importance of whatever decision was about to be made. Her father remained several steps behind her. Her mother stood beside him with nervous hands. Her brother avoided eye contact. Marcus, however, kept his eyes fixed on me, trying to appear composed even though the tension in his jaw revealed that he was calculating every possible outcome in his head. I spoke calmly. First name: Angela Carter. The operations director nodded and typed it into the manifest. Angela's eyes widened slightly when she heard her last name spoken aloud like that in front of everyone else, because the reality of our marriage had suddenly become more visible than it had been earlier when she treated me like a stranger on the runway. Her father looked surprised but said nothing. Her mother exhaled softly in relief. Angela remained silent. I continued. Second name: Mrs. Naomi Carter. Angela's mother blinked in confusion. Me? She asked quietly. I nodded once. She looked stunned but grateful. The operations director added her name to the list. Angela's father straightened slightly, expecting his name next. Her brother leaned forward a little. Marcus stood very still. I continued. Third name: Mr. Harold Carter. Angela's father. The operations director added the name. Harold nodded slowly. Thank you, he said quietly. The tension shifted slightly. Angela's brother waited impatiently now. Marcus looked confident again because he believed the pattern was obvious. Family. 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 And he had spent months behaving like he was already part of that family. I continued. Fourth name: Jonathan Carter. Angela's brother. He looked relieved immediately. That is right, he muttered under his breath. The operations director entered the final name. Angela's family now stood together quietly near the bottom of the jet stairs, looking far more humble than they had earlier that morning. Marcus stepped forward with a small confident smile. There we go, he said. Everything worked out. Angela turned her head slightly toward him but said nothing. Marcus looked back at me. I knew you would not let something small ruin the trip, he said. The operations director glanced at the manifest again. Sir, he said. Is that the complete passenger list? Marcus opened his mouth to answer, but I spoke first. Yes. Marcus blinked. Angela's brother looked confused. Marcus asked slowly. Wait. That is it. I nodded calmly. Marcus frowned. You forgot someone. Angela looked at him. Marcus continued. You forgot me. The operations director remained silent, waiting for confirmation. I looked at Marcus calmly. No, I said. I did not forget. The sentence landed harder than anything spoken earlier that morning. Marcus stared at me. Angela's brother looked shocked. Her father frowned. Her mother looked uncomfortable. Marcus laughed once, thinking he had misunderstood. Come on, he said. You are joking. I did not answer. Marcus's smile slowly faded. Angela watched quietly. Marcus spoke again, slower this time. David, he said. This is not funny. I replied calmly. Neither was what you said earlier. Marcus swallowed. Angela's brother whispered. Oh man. Marcus tried again. Look, he said. I apologized. I nodded once. Yes. Marcus continued. So why are you doing this? I answered calmly. Because you revealed exactly who you are when you thought I had nothing. Marcus shook his head. That is ridiculous, he said. People say things. I looked at him. You did not just say things. You built your entire confidence around humiliating someone you believed was beneath you. Marcus clenched his jaw. Angela's father spoke quietly. David, he said. Maybe we should reconsider. Angela looked at him. Harold continued. Marcus made mistakes but... I interrupted gently. Harold. Earlier this morning you said Marcus should have married your daughter instead of me. Harold fell silent immediately. Angela lowered her eyes. Marcus said nothing. I continued. If Marcus had married Angela, he would already be on the jet. The silence returned again. Marcus looked like he had been slapped. Angela watched him carefully. Marcus whispered slowly. You are really leaving me here? I answered calmly. Yes. Marcus shook his head. After everything. Angela spoke quietly. Marcus. Marcus turned toward her. Angela continued. You spent 6 months telling me David was nothing. Marcus said nothing. Angela finished softly. Now you know how that feels. Marcus looked stunned. Angela stepped slightly closer to me. The operations director spoke again. Sir, we must depart within the next 3 minutes. I nodded. The stewardess straightened at the door of the aircraft. The engines hummed louder now. Marcus stood frozen on the runway, realizing the weekend he promised everyone was still happening. But he was no longer part of it. Angela looked at him one final time. Marcus. She said quietly. You told me people like David do not belong on jets like this. Marcus lowered his head. Angela added softly. Turns out the jet belongs to him. The operations director gestured toward the stairs. Passengers may board. Angela's family slowly began walking toward the jet. Angela remained beside me. Marcus stood alone on the runway. Watching the very flight he had bragged about for weeks. Preparing to leave without him. And the look on his face as the engines began to power up was the same look he had once expected to see on mine. The low roar of the jet engines slowly grew louder behind us as the turbines warmed and the air around the runway began to ripple slightly from the heat while the crew completed their final checks and the early sunlight reflected across the polished fuselage of the aircraft. Angela's parents and her brother had already begun walking toward the stairs quietly without the loud confidence they had carried earlier, and the change in their posture revealed something important that morning had taught them. Humility arrives quickly when arrogance meets truth. Marcus, however, had not moved. He still stood several yards away from the jet, staring at the stairs where Angela's family was boarding, as if his mind refused to accept that the trip he had been bragging about for weeks was happening without him. The operations director spoke softly beside me. Sir, the aircraft will be ready for departure in 90 seconds. I nodded once. Angela stood beside me watching Marcus silently. Her expression carried a mixture of regret and clarity, as if she was finally seeing the entire situation without the illusions Marcus had spent months feeding her. Marcus finally spoke again. Angela. His voice was lower now. Angela turned slightly toward him. Marcus walked a few steps closer, though he kept his distance from me, as if he suddenly understood the difference between the two of us. Angela. He said again. You are really going with him? Angela looked at him calmly. Marcus continued. After everything we talked about. Angela answered quietly. Yes. Marcus laughed once, but the sound was hollow. You spent months telling me your marriage was over. Angela nodded. It almost was. Marcus shook his head. Then why are you standing beside him now? Angela replied calmly. Because the truth arrived before the plane left. Marcus looked frustrated. What truth? Angela gestured gently toward the aircraft. That the man I thought was failing was actually succeeding quietly. Marcus opened his mouth, but Angela continued. And the man who convinced me he was powerful built his confidence on pretending. Marcus had no response. Angela spoke again. Marcus. When you believed David was poor, you treated him like he did not belong in this world. Marcus whispered. I did not know. Angela replied softly. Exactly. Marcus looked down. Angela added. You only respected power. Marcus clenched his jaw. Angela finished calmly. David respected people. Marcus finally looked up again. And you believe he is better than me? Angela answered honestly. Yes. Marcus stood silent. The jet engines grew louder as the crew completed their final start sequence. The operations director stepped slightly aside, giving Angela and Marcus space for the conversation that clearly needed to finish before departure. Marcus spoke again after a long moment. Angela. He said quietly. You told me you wanted a bigger life. Angela nodded. I did. Marcus continued. You told me you wanted luxury. Angela nodded again. Marcus gestured toward the jet. This is luxury. Angela looked at the aircraft. Yes. She said. It is. Marcus waited for her to continue. Angela added quietly. But it belongs to a man who never used it to make people feel small. Marcus looked at me. Then back at Angela. Angela continued. You tried to make David feel small. Marcus's shoulders dropped slightly. Angela's voice softened. And that showed me exactly who you are. Marcus exhaled slowly. The reality of the situation had fully settled over him now. The flight he promised. The luxury weekend. The admiration he expected. All of it was happening. But none of it belonged to him. The operations director spoke gently. Sir, we must board now. I nodded. Angela looked at Marcus one final time. Marcus. She said quietly. You taught me something important. Marcus waited. Angela continued. You showed me what arrogance looks like when it believes it is winning. Marcus lowered his head. Angela finished softly. And David showed me what quiet strength looks like when it has nothing to prove. Marcus said nothing. The wind moved across the runway again. Angela turned toward the jet. I gestured slightly toward the stairs. Angela walked with me. Behind us the engines continued to power up. Marcus remained standing on the runway. Watching the people he had planned to impress board the aircraft owned by the man he had mocked. Angela stopped halfway up the stairs and turned back once more. Marcus looked up. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Angela said quietly. Goodbye, Marcus. She turned and continued climbing the stairs. The stewardess greeted us politely at the door. Welcome aboard, Mr. Carter. She said. Angela stepped inside the cabin and I followed behind her. The door closed slowly. Outside on the runway Marcus stood alone as the engines reached full idle power. And as the jet began to roll forward toward the runway line. The life Marcus had tried to build with arrogance disappeared into the sky without him. While the man he called poor was now flying a $50 billion empire into the morning sky. The moment the jet began moving across the runway, the deep rumble of the engines filled the cabin and the city skyline in the distance slowly started shrinking behind the glass windows while the morning sun painted the clouds in gold and white like the sky itself was welcoming the aircraft into a different world. Angela stood quietly beside the window inside the luxurious cabin looking out at the runway where Marcus was now nothing more than a distant figure becoming smaller with every second. The polished interior of the jet reflected soft lighting across the leather seats and polished wood panels while the stewardess closed the cabin door and walked toward the cockpit with the calm professionalism of someone used to transporting people whose lives operate far above ordinary schedules. Angela slowly sat down but her eyes were still fixed outside. She spoke quietly. He is still standing there. I glanced toward the window. The runway stretched far behind us now. Marcus had become only a small dark shape near the edge of the tarmac. He will eventually leave. I said calmly. Angela nodded slowly. But the weight of everything that had happened that morning still hung between us. Her parents sat several rows back quietly speaking to each other in hushed voices while her brother looked out the opposite window still processing the reality that the man he had laughed at earlier owned the aircraft he was now sitting inside. The jet accelerated smoothly and lifted off the runway, climbing into the bright sky above the city. Angela watched the ground disappear beneath the clouds. For several minutes she said nothing. Then she turned toward me. "David." Her voice was soft. I waited. Angela looked down at her hands. "I meant what I said earlier," she said. "I was wrong." The words carried no pride, no defensiveness, no excuses. Only truth. I nodded slightly. Angela continued quietly. "When I stood on that runway telling you that you did not belong on this jet, I believed it." She lifted her eyes. "And that is what scares me the most." I remained silent, allowing her to continue. Angela spoke slowly. "I believed the man who stayed quiet was the man who had nothing." She looked toward the front of the cabin. "But you were building an empire." Her voice trembled slightly. "And I never even asked." The jet climbed higher above the clouds, where the sunlight grew brighter and the sky opened into an endless horizon. Angela turned back toward me again. "David," she said. "Why did you stay?" I raised an eyebrow slightly. "You could have left years ago," she explained. "You could have married someone who understood your world." I answered calmly. "Because I did not want someone who understood the empire." Angela listened. "I wanted someone who understood the man." Angela lowered her head again. "I am not sure I did that very well," she whispered. I looked at her. Angela's eyes were slightly red now. But she continued, speaking honestly. "Marcus made it easy to believe something that was not true," she admitted. "He made noise. He made promises. He looked successful." She paused briefly. "You looked quiet." I smiled slightly. Angela noticed. "Quiet is not very impressive at family gatherings," she said softly. I answered calmly. "Quiet is how real power moves." Angela nodded slowly. The jet leveled out above the clouds and the cabin grew peaceful with only the soft hum of the engine surrounding us. Angela looked out the window again. Then she turned back toward me. "David," she said. "What happens to us now?" The question lingered between us. Her parents and brother remained silent in the back of the cabin, respecting the space that moment required. I spoke calmly. "That depends." Angela looked at me. "On what?" I answered. "On whether you want the man. Or the empire." Angela shook her head immediately. "I already know the answer," she said. I raised an eyebrow slightly. Angela continued. "If I wanted the empire," she said, "I would have stayed with Marcus." The honesty of that sentence made the moment even more real. Angela finished quietly. "But the man who stood on that runway while everyone laughed at him. That man is the one I married." She paused briefly. "And that is the man I choose now." The cabin remained silent for a moment. Then I nodded once. Angela exhaled slowly, as if a weight she had been carrying all morning finally lifted. She leaned back into the seat beside me and looked out at the endless sky stretching across the horizon. Down on the runway far below, Marcus Hale was likely still trying to explain to himself how the man he believed was poor had taken off in the jet he promised to board. But up here above the clouds the truth had already settled. The man they laughed at owned the runway, owned the jet, owned the empire. And most importantly, still had the quiet strength to forgive those who once believed he had nothing. The aircraft continued flying smoothly toward the distant horizon. And the story that began with laughter on a runway ended high above the clouds, where arrogance could no longer reach.